He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and I'm here today to discuss some statistical details regarding missing persons. Of course, before we get into that, check us out on our social media, X, YouTube, and Facebook. And should you ever wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, submissions, or comments, anything that just pops into your mind. But without further ado, let's get into this. Now, some of these stats I have mentioned in previous episodes, but for all of you new listeners that are here today, I'm just going to give a whole recap and deep dive into this, especially because we're in a new year now, and I've added in some 2023 statistics as well. So I sourced these numbers from the Canadian government website, and I quote, "The overall number of missing persons who went missing in 2022 rose over the previous year by 9%. Now, this increase demonstrates a gradual return to pre-COVID numbers. The most notable change between 2018 and 2022 has been the number of missing persons between 2019 and 2020, which decreased in 2020 by 16%. When we've broken down this by age group, the frequency in most provinces for occurrences involving adults are consistent with pre-COVID levels. The frequency for those under the age of 18 years old, children, have risen but remain less than the number observed in 2018. When the number of missing persons are observed in relation to the population for that given year, similar increases and decreases are found." End quote. So I'm going to go back all the way to 2018 for these numbers here, in which case we have 42,375 children that went missing. And note, this is Canada-wide. We had 31,817 adults that went missing. If we look at 2019 now, we have 40,511 children that went missing, and 33,178 adults that went missing. 2020, we have 32,085 children that went missing, 30,053 adults who went missing. 2021, 28,326 children went missing, 31,656 adults went missing. 2022, 31,334 children went missing, 33,393 adults went missing. And in 2023, 34,437 children went missing, and 35,513 adults went missing. It's important to note, again, I'm going to mention this later, some of these numbers do roll over a little bit, but in 2024, currently we are already at that threshold of 34,000 children having gone missing and over 35,000 adults missing. Again, these numbers are rolling over. Cases that are not solved, then they're open-ended, they carry forth. So Canada's population sits at just over 41 million. And in British Columbia, 2022, we saw the highest number of missing adult reports per capita out of the entirety of Canada. That's 273 reports per 100,000 people. This was followed by Saskatchewan with 146 reports per 100,000 people. And then Prince Edward Island having the lowest with 8 people per 100,000 people. In 2022, Saskatchewan had the highest number of missing children youth reports per capita with 398 reports per 100,000 people. This is followed by Manitoba, 291 reports per 100,000 people, and then Prince Edward Island back in the lowest with 3 reports per 100,000 people. Now let's clear the air here. A fair share of these reports, like I said, they're resolved within 24 hours. A fair few are abductions, and then you have runaways and other miscellaneous reports. But at its core, there is that small margin of cases that people just vanish. Now, in 2023, a small number of these children went missing in Canadian forests specifically. When we look at adults, same thing. A small margin go missing in the wilds of Canada as well. Now, there is no precise count to deduce how many there actually are. And if there is such a tool, I guarantee it's not really available to the public. You'd have to do a lot of really heavy back-end digging to do such a thing. But without this precise count, it's more identified that British Columbia, however, has the higher amount. And this is based off of search and rescue operations and the amount of operations that are conducted. That amount is basically applied to deduce that, okay, British Columbia is the main suspect here. This is attributed to British Columbia's massive forested backyard and the variety of outdoor activities that are connected with such a massive landscape. And when you come to British Columbia, you're going to have national parks out the wazoo, tons of hiking trails, tons of logging back road trails. There's tons of things you can do. Lakes everywhere to go kayaking, boating. It's a great outdoor place to be. Now, search and rescue operations have proven to be quite effective, and with advanced technologies like drones and GPS, the odds of being found remain very high when you happen to get lost in the woods of North America. Hopefully you don't, though. Before we venture too far into that, let's just add some more numbers here from our friends down south in the United States. In 2021, 337,195 children went missing. 521,705 adults went missing. 2022, 359,094 children went missing, and 205,995 adults went missing. And then in 2023, approximately 360,000 children have been missing, and 209,050 adults are missing. Again, I reiterate, some of these cases remain open moving into another year. Between 2021 and 2022, we can see that 93,718 missing adult cases did stay open. In addition, most of these cases do get resolved. In 2024, the United States population is just shy of hitting 342 million, which explains why there's a much larger, basically, number of missing individuals compared to Canada when we are just 41 around there. We're behind by a good 300 million. That's a huge difference. So now, for fun, let's see how this stacks with alien abductions and Bigfoot encounters. Now remember, I myself can only believe but cannot confirm aliens or Bigfoot exist, for I have not had my own personal encounter of either. Have I seen things? Absolutely. Have you seen things? I reckon so. Or you're just a curious soul turning into the show for a good time. But regardless, to each their own, let's go down this rabbit hole. Back to Canada, in the Yukon, approximately 41 people go missing each year. This number includes both children and adults. Now, the Yukon is very north of North America. It's the upper part of Canada, and the province's population count as of September 20th, 2023, was 45,597. So that's approximately 41 people going missing each year out of that number. And if we look at these 41 missing case reports, they do involve remote or wilderness areas. I made sure to try and exclusively deduce that. And being such a smaller amount, it was actually a little bit easier to pinpoint how many people were involved in going missing here. And that's segueing now to looking at Canada's UFO abduction reports. The provinces with the lowest to highest are as follows. British Columbia is at the bottom, Nova Scotia, then New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, and then at the number one spot, the Yukon. How interesting is that? Now note, I did say abductions and not sightings, which Ontario holds the lead for with sightings, and then British Columbia, and lastly Alberta. So let's also examine that to say alien abductions do imply a witness. Otherwise, how do we know? It could always mean that maybe someone is a survivor of that case. They were abducted and dropped back off. Now, it's simply a designated missing persons report, right? Now, there is a scene from Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, that I'm going to mention here. It's where Jack is locked up at the beginning, and Black Pearl strolls into Port Royal, and his fellow imprisoned pirates are recalling stories of the Black Pearl and how it preys on ships, never leaving any survivors. And then Jack quips back, "No survivors? Well, where do the stories come from, I wonder?" It's an absolutely great line, and it's one that applies here, where of course many individuals have come forward reporting being abducted, but not everyone comes back, if they are even abducted in the first place. I know I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate there, but there are 2 movies I highly recommend that go hand in hand with the information that I'm detailing here in this episode. Missing 411, which is released in 2016, and then The Missing 411, The Hunted, which was released in 2019. These films do a great job of exploring where individuals in the woods have basically just up and disappeared, leaving no trace, both children and adults alike. While in some cases, they find remnants like clothing and other pieces of evidence in places completely inaccessible by a small child, or huge amounts of terrain that has been trekked over that an adult could not have made in this time frame. But there they are, articles of clothing and other objects, so how is that possible? And I'm not trying to discredit anyone that may come forward and say they have a UFO abduction. I'm not trying to do that at all. I think that if you have an experience and you are fortunate enough to return, then that's good. There's definitely a causation and a reason for that. But I don't think everyone is that lucky. I think people do go missing in these situations. Like I said, all I can do is believe. I've not had my own personal experience, but I do believe not everyone makes it out. It's just like when everyone goes out into the woods to go hiking, sometimes you don't come back out of those woods. I'm going to speak to that a little bit later here. So search and rescue has evolved greatly over the years with one great tactic called grid search. Now, grid searchers are trained to move slowly and deliberately through an area in a straight line, maintaining their spacing with the person on either side of them and not taking the path of least resistance, like walking around a thorn bush. No, you're going straight through it. I took a look into what discussions were happening between search and rescue operators, and they seem to agree that grid searching is often the last resort strategy when trying to find someone, simply because of the required manpower to adequately cover large areas. The general rule of thumb is that a trained grid searcher team requires about 3.5 hours to cover 1 mile. So imagine you have 1 square mile to search. Assuming you have 25 people to search that 1 square mile, you then decide on spacing. For this, let's say 20 feet between each searcher. This line will need to make 11 parallel passes through the area to cover it all, and would take roughly 37 hours for the team to move at a slow, deliberate pace. Once at the end of a pass, the line will then pivot, and the person on the inside will stay in place, becoming the axis, while the others come around. Then that inner end will move over into the unsearched area, the length of the predetermined interval. Everyone spreads out accordingly, and then the whole line moves in the opposite direction, making the next pass. With that being said, we're going to venture back to Bigfoot in Canada, British Columbia. Now, BC holds the highest concentration of Sasquatch sightings, which again is a historic hotspot for encounters, of course, when we look in the Harrison Hot Springs area and some places up north of BC. This is followed by Ontario and Manitoba. Now, this is pulled from sources like the BFRO and Global News. To get factual numbers for you listeners is quite difficult, as a lot of that is not well documented. A lot of people like to keep that thing to themselves. And the stuff that is, well, I do imagine Forest Services have, well, alongside some government body, it all locked up somewhere. Probably dozens of briefcases and boxes filled with crazy reports and stuff and things. But I'm kind of getting towards the case of Albert Ostman. It was not an ideal experience for him. I did a full episode on the Albert Ostman experience before. That was probably at least a couple years ago now. Definitely go check it out. It's on our feeds. It goes into a very deep dive of the whole situation. But in short, I'm going to give you a quick cut of the experience here. Now, this was back in 1924, and he went to a specific remote area for a little vacation. He was informed that certain ongoings have taken place in this area regarding bipedal creatures, but he disregarded it all. So, one night he's asleep in his sleep sack when he suddenly is picked up and carried off. 3 hours go by before he was dropped down on a plateau. He got out, saw his captive. It was a large, hairy Sasquatch. Not just one, but a family group. Ostman did have his gun in his sleep sack, but he refused to use it just because he was outnumbered in their size. What's the point? A week went by until he found an opportunity to escape, and it wasn't until at least 24 years had passed that he decided to share his encounter. So he sat on that for a very long time, and this story has met a lot of opposition based on the lack of evidence, of course, but as mentioned, The fact that Albert Ostman held onto the story for so long prompts wonder amongst the community. And I wanted to highlight this because when we're talking about missing person reports, here's someone who did go missing, came back, and then reported it years later. What if he didn't get that opportunity to escape? Again, am I just totally 100% agreeing how this experience happened? No, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So let's say it didn't happen and he just made it up. That is always a possibility. But on the flip side now, if it did happen and he did not get out of that situation, then how would we ever know? We wouldn't. I mean, maybe someone would stumble upon his old campsite, find some evidence there, maybe some prints, maybe not some prints, and that's it. But how many people do go missing in the woods? Like how many? We've already labeled that there is a fair amount of people that go missing in the provinces. And so these people that do go missing in the woods, how many of them really do make it back out? The ones that don't, maybe something like this happens. And I'm not trying to insinuate that this is absolutely 100% the causation and the fallout of missing persons that go missing in the wilderness. That's not the case. It could be as simple as you're walking and you trip and you break your ankle and you're out there and, a predator comes and finds you. It could be a million things. Nature is very, very vicious. But I digress. In closing, and back to some numbers, British Columbia has hit that 5 million population mark very recently. If we look at the fact that 273 people go missing per every 100,000, well, if my math is right, that equals out to 13,650 people for the 2022 year going missing. And it just leaves me in shock to see such a high number. And I think that's largely due to the news. This is a biased opinion, I know. But for me, when I watch the news and they say, hey, 2 people went missing here. Oh, there was a car accident, 1 person missing. And, a few weeks go by and they say, oh, another 6 people went missing here. It kind of goes over one's head. And what I mean by that is nothing insincere to these accidents that happen where someone goes missing, but it is that our ability to actually notice and accept the fact that there is a heckin' lot more people going missing than what society as a whole really is aware of. Do we know for certain what all 100% missing persons cases are attributed to in terms of causation? No, we don't. But we have a pretty good ability to deduce it in today's society. However, not everyone gets found, as sad as it is to say, and many will never be found. Some murder cases go on for decades, and with luck, some do get solved. But the forests of Canada can be very unforgiving, and they should not be taken lightly. We go camping, hiking, and drive back roads, but we're no longer residents of the woods. That part of humanity, it's faded or starting to, final nail in the coffin, I would feel like, because it's still accessible for a select few individuals. Some people try to reignite that inside them, but the majority of folks are labeled as tourists. As far as I'm concerned, when you go into those woods, you're packing up and leaving afterwards, and that's that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just to display how we have separated ourselves from nature and how we have to make sure we remind ourselves that when we step into those woods, we're in someone else's home. And in this case, that's Bigfoot, cougar, bears, wolves, oh my. And with that, I leave on the note of a couple Sasquatch experiences, and I quote, in 1974, a friend and I applied for 2 expired gold placer leases on Lauren Creek. Just to pause here, if you're unsure what a placer lease is, basically just getting land, a permit on the land accessible to basically perform mining, in this case gold. Here we go. 30 miles east of Terrace, British Columbia, on the railroad side of the river. The boat used to cross the river was tied up at Jim's place on the highway side of the river. Since there were grizzly bear in the area, we carried rifles. In shooting the breeze one evening, we asked Jim what kind of wildlife was in the area. Of course, there was moose. But recently he had seen something different. While doing some work there, he spotted a moving patch of brown a short distance away. Curious as to what it may be, he sneaked closer. It appeared to be brown-colored and pretty much just the same as a bear that had its back towards him and was standing up on its hind legs eating Saskatoon berries. However, it was using its front paws like hands. The last cover was 50 feet from this creature, and this was as close as he could get. From this point, he saw that the paws were hands, and this was not a bear, but some kind of hair-covered human-like creature, a little over 6 feet tall. Also, it had a very strong odor that reminded him of a camel smell when he once worked in a circus. After about 10 minutes, the creature sensed that something was near, and it turned sideways. Spotted Jim immediately, who then saw it was a female as it actually had breasts. The creature then just trotted off. It was then Jim's wife spoke up. The previous summer, about the same time of the year, she was home alone. Suddenly, the two tied-up watchdogs raised an awful commotion, more so than if a bear was around. Stepping outside, she saw through the trees about 100 yards away, skirting the yard, a large black bear walking on its hind legs. She knew a bear didn't walk on its hind legs, and after being interviewed, it was stated that it just certainly appeared that this is what both of them had seen. Now, this also occurred in 1974. And I quote, "At that time, the new highway bridges in the terrace had reached a point in construction where it was safe for the public to inspect them after working hours. Taking advantage of this, Dick and a friend decided to cross to Ferry Island from the terrace side and explore it. On the riverbank, they found fresh, large footprints. They went back and picked some plaster of cameras and some other equipment, and after the casts were made through a search, was made for the creature, but it was not seen. They kept their find a secret until they were sure it was no longer around. It is quite possible this creature was one that was seen at Lorne Creek." End quote. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cryptid Clues. We'll be back next week. Until then, you can find us on our socials, X, YouTube, Facebook, or email us at cryptidclues@gmail.com. So till next time, take care and stay safe.